Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this afternoon's webinar, which is centered around innovation, data, and technology. My name is Nasrananda, and I will be taking you through today's topic, where I'm joined by Alan Mutuma, our friends from the Center of Affordable Housing Forum. Alan, I think what I will do now is to give you an opportunity to introduce yourself. But before then, just a few housekeeping rules, everyone. If you could kindly ensure that you maintain any questions you might have towards the end of the session, where we will give you an opportunity to ask your questions to Alan and myself where required. So without further ado, I think once again, Alan, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. Please let me know if you can see my screen, Alan, just to confirm.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I can, but I'm happy to share on my end as well.
I'm just sharing the updated one on my side.
Okay.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Okay, I think I lost the one I was sharing. There we go. Great. So thank you so much once again, everyone, for joining us. We're here to discuss innovation, data, and technology, where our aim this afternoon is to unpack with you the role of data, technology, and innovation with the Center for Affordable Housing Finance in Africa. With me, I have Alan Mutuma, who is from CAF. And Alan, I think I'll give you an opportunity to briefly introduce yourself, and then we can dive into the slides in your presentation, where you can then expound on who CAF is and what do you do at CAF.
Great. Thanks, Nasra, and thanks to the entire KGBS team for organizing this webinar. And good afternoon, everybody. My name is Alan Mutuma. I am an employee of Center for Affordable Housing Finance in Africa. It's a bit of a mouthful. So the short form is CAF. And I lead the Open Access Initiative, which I will delve into further. CAF as an organization is based in South Africa, but I currently sit in Kenya, and we are growing the Kenyan team. But I'll be able to get into further detail about the work that we're doing and the interesting outputs that we are currently building out.
Great. Thank you so much. So I guess I'll leave it to you to take us through what it is that you do at CAF and to tell us essentially what you're about and what you're seeing, and especially to also highlight some aspects of the open access initiatives. Thanks, Alan. Over to you.
Thanks, Nasra. Will you be moving the slides for me?
Yeah.
All right. Okay, cool. So yeah, I think as an introduction to CAF, I did mention that we are based in South Africa. So the way to look at CAF is that we are an independent think tank that is pursuing the mission of making Africa's housing finance markets to work. And our work as CAF extends across the entire continent. And it's supported, and we also collaborate with a wide range of funders and partners, such as the French Development Bank, FSD Africa, and IFC, just to mention a few. And I think perhaps what is pretty well known about CAF is the annual publication that we usually make. It's called the Annual Housing Finance Yearbook, which is a yearbook publication that brings together the reviews and developments in the housing finance and housing delivery space in each of the African countries. So it's usually a massive publication effort where we try and profile each of the African countries to see what is happening within the housing space. And please feel free to access that yearbook. It's available on our website. What's available is a 2022 publication, but before the end of November, we should have been able to publish this year's yearbook as well. CAF is also a secretariat of the African Union Housing Finance Organization, AUHF. It's a member-led organization that has been in existence since 1958. And we, as I said, we have our conference coming up at the end of this month. If you happen to be in Namibia or are able to travel to Namibia, it would be great. And I'm extending a formal invite to us because the conference will be unpacking the theme of affordable housing as a frontline investment and getting cases from different countries. That aside, I think the point that I want to make about CAF is, as an organization, what our emphasis really is on the role finance plays in realizing housing markets. As an organization, we champion for market intelligence. So data, market analytics, and research are our bread and butter. And we use these particular levers to stimulate investor interests and more importantly, to support better policy making. We are also very well networked as an organization, and we engage with different stakeholders at all levels of governments and across the entire continent. And really the aim is for us to be able to realize investments into affordable housing. So that's the context within which I come to. And perhaps you can move to the next slide for me to introduce the Open Access Initiative. And really the thesis of the program that I run called the Open Access Initiative is that data is fundamental to investment decisions. And here we're talking about good quality and focused data, which is difficult to come by. And this data is important because it helps us understand and quantify, more importantly, the investment opportunities that exist in housing and also the risks that are embedded within those opportunities. And when you look at the business cases and board presentations that we often develop as investors in affordable housing, they are concerned about collecting data along 5 main Ps. The first one is a product that you want to develop. The second one is a process that we are going to follow to develop this product. So that's the step, the time, and the cost. The third P has to do with the people, who is consuming this product, what are their income characteristics, what is their bio data and stuff like that. Then the fourth P is the performance. How will these investments perform? Will they meet the return expectations that we had set for them? And finally, the practice. What is the best way of doing things and opportunities that exist for cost savings? And that is where the Open Access Initiative comes in. It's championed by CAF and other like-minded investors such as FSD Africa Investments, FSD Kenya Investments, REAL, and IHS. That's International Housing Solutions Kenya. And really, open access is a market system intervention that seeks to address the information asymmetry that exists in the market. And the question is, how are we going to achieve a reduction in information asymmetry? And we want to do this by collecting the investment experiences and learnings that investors have made during the investment process. And what we are saying is that private sector investors usually sit with a lot of information that they produce during the investment process. So the board papers, the financial models, feasibility studies, and many reports that are usually produced during the investment process, when they are aggregated and analyzed, they then allow for one to be able to produce knowledge outputs that can be able to help the market understand and quantify the risks and the value chain blockages that exist. And that's what the open access is seeking to do. And I'll just take us through very briefly some of the knowledge outputs we've done as a result of crowding in data from private sector players. So one of the knowledge outputs is the Housing Development Cost Benchmark Report. I won't get into the meat of it, But there we're trying to figure out, what is the cost of actually building an affordable house in Kenya. And what we got is that it ranges between 3 to 4 million shillings at a per square meter cost of about 68K to 74K. And I'll be happy for us to engage with this report at a different venue and get what the feedback would be from your experience. The other second knowledge output that we have been able to do is the Nairobi Metropolitan Area Dashboard, which is in the next slide. And what we saw is that the market lacks like a one-stop shop for all the housing supply data in Kenya. And outside the NMA, I don't think this data is being tracked anywhere else. So to address this gap, we then developed a dashboard that shows the distribution of about 30,000 housing units spread over 1,000 projects within the Nairobi metropolitan area. So we cover 5 counties. We cover Kiambu, Kajiado, Nairobi, and Machakos. The only county we don't cover in the NMA area is Murang'a because it's mainly an agricultural area and houses there are self-built. So again, just encourage members to be able to interact with this particular dashboard because it provides like a wide array of data points from location to price points, densities, utilities, service charge, etc., etc. And we want to be collecting this data on an annual basis. And there's a section for individuals to also review and submit their sort of comments and opinions in terms of how we can be able to improve that particular dashboard. Then finally, we undertook a massive effort in conjunction with the FSD Kenya to do a legal review on all the laws that touch on affordable housing. So we evaluated 140 statutes and policies that touch on affordable housing, and we packaged it into an online live document called a Git book that then breaks down the laws that touch on the different value chains of the housing sector. So we have laws that touch on land assembly, laws that touch on physical planning, on construction and maintenance and financing. And it was a very interesting effort because we just realized the multiplicities of laws and the complications of laws that perhaps don't speak to each other and the need for better coordination at all levels of government. But I think the point that I'm trying to make is that this is a living document that can be accessed online. And we want to be able to use it to review, to record and track developments within the policy and legal framework that is governing affordable housing in Kenya. So again, please feel free to engage with it. There's still a section for us to be able to comment and give any updates that we think we should be able to include in it. So in a nutshell, I think the work that CAF is doing is all geared, and the last slide, is all geared towards reducing the information asymmetry that exists within the housing space. Our business is data, and we have an ambition to be able to scale this process of information sharing from all parties, not just in Kenya, but across the entire continent. So Kenya is a pilot country that we have chosen for the Open Access Initiative, but we do have ambition to roll it out across all other African countries. And I think we are pleased to be also working on an MOU with KGBS to be able to crowd in further participation in open access. As a close of introduction, the principle really is that we do not seek to interfere with the competitive landscape in the market, but instead we want to foster a healthy competition that allows investors and developers to operate at high efficiency levels, because if we compete in terms of how we access data rather than how we use it, then we are wasting resources. If 5 or 6 developers are carrying out feasibility studies in the same location, that is a multiplication or a duplication of effort that can otherwise be avoided. And we want to take away that effort of being able to access the data and allow investors to focus on the business of investments. So with that, there's quite a number of words I'd just like to posit there as an introduction to CAF and the work that we're doing.
So thank you so much, Alan. I really, really appreciate you taking the time to take us through what it is that you do at CAF and some of the initiatives that you're pushing. Really briefly, for those of you who are, listening in, before you have some of the contact information, and separately, we will be sharing the slides for this particular presentation and webinar shortly thereafter. But I think now that we've finished the introductory part of this discussion, Alan, I think what I would be curious to ask you, and now the second portion where I can ask you a few questions, is having just come off the Africa Climate Summit, what, in your mind or in your opinion, do you think we should expect to see from an affordable housing perspective? Now that at ACS we actually had a track dedicated to essentially the built environment, and one of the things that we did discuss during that week was social housing. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, thanks for that, Nasra. I think just taking a step back, the Africa Climate Summit was a much needed dialogue between different actors from both the public and private sector.
Yeah.
To discuss, what could be jointly done to address the present and very real threat of climate risk. And when you get a chance to go through the declaration, it elaborates some very strong initiatives and commitments that were made by governments and private institutions in terms of what their contributions will be from that regard. And I think it's also important to note that when it comes to climate risk investments, the built environment and by extension, affordable housing is not always at the forefront. And I do appreciate the work that KGBS and other stakeholders within the built environment did to make that case for climate related investing with regard to housing. And I say this because when you look at the monetary commitments that were made, majority of them actually went to agriculture and renewable energy. But nonetheless, I think the case that was made there was that there's a need for green transitioning into the into the built environment. And more importantly, the mechanisms of building transition pathways for the urban population, particularly those who are most vulnerable to climate risks. Because if you look at urban populations across all African cities, like it's very clear, like in Nairobi, it's about 60% of the urban population are living in informal settlements. And those are the ones that are at highest risk or vulnerabilities when it comes to facing climate risks, such as flooding or poor water and sanitation mechanisms that have been put in place. So from a policy perspective, I think there has been sufficient traction being made, and I hope that we continue pushing our voice to be heard when it comes to like the Kenya Climate Change Act or the National Climate Change Action Plan, to just ensure that the built environment voice is heard. But I think from an investment perspective, then there needs to be a significant sort of shift towards now putting mechanisms in place to bring in further resources into the built environment.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And so in your position and your interaction with data, and now with sustainability being really pushed, in Africa, especially now that we almost are beginning to see a common African position, what do you think is the role of data in pushing for a more efficient industry?
Yeah. Our business at CAF is data. And at the beginning of the presentation, I did make the point that data is fundamental to decision making. So without sufficient data, we can't make any decisions, or if we do make decisions, because we often have to make decisions, then we might end up making poor informed decisions that only adds the burden of inefficiency. And that is what lack of data breeds. I think it breeds an asymmetry that then makes it very difficult to navigate the space of housing.
Yeah.
And that is what inhibits as well the adoption of at least green building practices from where I sit.
Yeah.
Because most of the participants in the open access initiative, when you approach them and you're collecting data from them and you want to find out what green measures they've put in place to future-proof their investment from a climate perspective, most of them just shy away from it because we do not know what the quantified benefits are. And therefore, what we do not know, well, then we do not embrace. So I think as an industry, there is a real need to change our mindsets, and I think be open to collecting, but more importantly to sharing the data to neutral aggregators. And in this case, of course, I'll be biased to position the Open Access Initiative as a neutral aggregator who solely exist to create knowledge outputs and reduce the information asymmetry. But I think the point that I'm trying to make is that data is really the bedrock of an efficient industry, and the more data plagued we are from a built environment or even from a green built environment perspective, then the less efficient and the less sort of adaptive we will be for the future proofing of our investments.
Thank you. Thank you so much for that, Alan. I guess my last question to you before I move over to our audience is, like, you're right in the sense that now we need data to really track even where we're going, right? Yeah. And so we've just come off the ACS, and as you correctly pointed out, there was a heavier focus around renewables and carbon markets. But I want to assure you and the people on this webinar, there's a lot of movement happening, and you will start to see a lot more things happen between now and I suspect Q1 2024, because I think governments are starting to realize that there are untapped opportunities when it comes to cities. There's also an untapped opportunity when it comes to supporting the built environment as an ecosystem of opportunities. And I can just speak for Nairobi, City County. One of the things that is happening now is that there's a climate change management bill, which is being reviewed for a second reading soon, next week, actually. And what that creates is an opportunity for then us to lobby the different industries to be very vocal from a climate perspective, in a way that allows us to then contribute to the bigger agenda around affordable housing, for example, and the other things that are needed. So in closing, now that ACS is out of the way and we're essentially counting down to COP, is there anything you feel should be looked at as the African position as we, count down to COP, or is there anything you think is a key takeaway as we count down to COP?
Yeah, I think you've made very strong points there, and the bill that's being drafted is going to be a very important one in moving us the right direction. And when it comes for public participation, we'll be very keen to look at it and give our input. And your question, looking at Africa's position now as we count towards COP and focusing on the built environment. From a stats perspective, I think it is clear that as a continent,
Alan, are you there? I think we've lost you. Oh, there we are. Yes, can hear you now.
You can hear me now? Sure. Sorry about that. So I was saying from a stats perspective, there's some reports that I went through, and
Sorry, I think I can't hear you, so I'm not too sure what's happening with your sound.
Oh,
Now you're back. Yeah.
am I back?
Yes. Yeah.
Sorry about that. Yeah, no, just trying to make the point that Africa as a continent is really vulnerable to climate shocks. In 2021, there were 131 extreme weather extreme weather changes within the continent. Majority of these were floods, and then followed by storms and droughts. And according to the IMF climate data change, majority of the countries that reported climate activity was South Africa, Ethiopia, Mozambique, and Kenya. And I think the point I'm trying to make is that all these climate risks have a direct impact on housing in terms of its production, the cost, and the longevity. And this impact can be devastating because it then renders people homeless. And there are several other statistics that I could quote, but I think as we lead towards COP, what we need to make a stronger case for is the explicit tracking of the relationship between climate and housing. I think we appreciate that relationship exists, but what we also need to appreciate is the strength and the direction of the relationship, because what I mean is the relationship between climate and housing actually goes in both directions. When you look at housing in both its construction and ongoing life, it has an impact on environment because of the carbon emissions that come from the used building materials and the manufacturing of building materials, but also vice versa. There is an impact that the environment has on housing because flooding, extreme heat also affect the quality and longevity of the house that we live in. So I think these impacts need to be substantiated and the cost needs to be sort of also narrowed down so that we can be able to really understand how that causal relationship works. And also be able to build a stronger case for it as we move towards COP.
Great. Thank you so much, Alan, for your time and presenting to us what you do at both at CAF and understanding how data, tech, and innovation operates within this space as the built environment. I think now I will invite our attendees to ask questions. We will be taking 3 questions, but please keep them very short and to the point. And I see there's a hand up, so I will allow you to speak. So I'll take one from Bernard first, and then followed by Architect Njiru.
Good afternoon, everybody. This is Bernard. I just have one or two contribution and a question. First is that what you are speaking about the product part of giving the details of the product. You realize in Europe, they have already developed what you call a digital product passport that's able to give the trace of that product from the time it's manufactured to the time to reach the construction site. So these are the kind of innovation now, even in Africa, and here we can embrace it. And then the second point that I wanted to raise is the issue of repetition. There's a lot of data collection that is being repeated by a built environment. But realize, like what you are trying to give, the cost of constructing a 2-bedroom, 3-bedroom, they are different. Now, if you try to Google, you find very different types of data. If you can have one sector, like the way you are saying, and then you bring these people on board, it will say 3 things at the same time: time, energy, and resources. And lastly, on the issue of affordable housing, there are so many things that the built environment can help solve and even create a lot of green jobs from the sector and address the issue of so many things like climate change, like this issue of scope 3 in agriculture. It can be solved by the built environment because Scope 3 involve around storage, that is warehouse, and also transportation. That's it. All those transportation and warehouse fall under built environment. So they're interrelated. Once we solve some of the problems in the built environment, even the agricultural sectors are going to benefit in solving some of these carbon emission activities. Thank you.
Thank you, Bernard. Architect Njiru, over to you.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Yes.
Good, yes. My name is Architect Njiru, rather that's a title, but I am also a data scientist. So this was a particularly interesting session. Thank you, Alan, and CAF by extension. I just have two questions. The first is to do with your data collection techniques. So I wanted to know how exactly do you collect this data, even as you plan to scale regionally? Is this data collected through survey studies, or do you call construction professionals like myself, or is it surrendered by government? I don't know what exactly does that look like, and how do you leverage KGBS and the built environment professionals in that regard? That's the first question. The second question is, based on your introduction, I think, based on my understanding really of your introduction, CAF is basically data relevant, but regarding Africa's housing finance situation. Okay, so leveraging data in that regard. I wanted to know, based on this open data source that you're championing and you're creating, is there a targeted objective with the financials of this particular aspect, or is it a general open data source that can generally be used by different kinds of professionals, of which part of that information is financial and others? So thank you.
Yeah, thanks for those questions, Architect Njiru. And they're really, really good questions. When it comes to the data collection methodology for the Open Access Initiative and for CAF in general, perhaps maybe start from the general. As Open Access, we have developed a very, very detailed data collection templates. They are currently Excel-based, and they are predicated on the 5 Ps that I had shown. So on product, we go into the very elemental things that make up the product, and we had QS sort of build that out for us. When it comes to process, we then have laid out what the processes or steps are for getting approvals and for rolling out projects. Then for people, we have sort of survey data questions that have to do with collecting the different affordability characteristics and many other biodata aspects of people. Then for performance, of course, it has to do with the operational performance of an asset, whether it's for sale, whether it's rental, and practice then becomes the one that ties them all together. So yes, we do have very detailed Excel templates that aid in that collection. And the principle of open access as well is that we do not place the burden of data collection on the individuals sharing the data. So they share the data in any format that they feel comfortable in sharing. And then we have the task of feeding that data through our data collection templates. And we are actually in the process of automating those templates in conjunction with iBuild Global, which is a tech player within that space. So that's how we are fashioned. Now, specifically when it came to the development cost benchmark, for that we actually built out BQs for the different typologies that we had sort of formed a hypothesis on. And then we sent out the BQs and had different professionals fill them out. We had contractors, we had developers, we had QSs, and we also held workshops with these different professionals to crowd in the information. And then we also carried out some desktop surveys. And I think to Bernard's earlier point, yes, there are many people who are doing stuff like benchmarking exercises and cost. And we are happy to challenge them because we have the BQs that we used. So we are happy to share those as open source data. And what we are saying that the level of data interrogation is not as deep as we want it to be as a market. And we are hoping that those individuals who usually post these surveys, even professional bodies, if they're able to make those open source, so that we can be able to do like a serious comparison on rates, for instance, of casting slabs and what the rate of door frames are. Like if you can get to that level of granularity, it would be betterment for the whole industry. Then in terms of the second question had to do with why open source, like why go through the effort of collecting all this data and then make it available for the industry. For us, really, the measure of success will be being able to crowd in investments into housing. And whatever that mechanism is measured, it could be the dollar investments made into a country based on better understanding of the country, or an increased uptake in housing based on the number of people who are able to access it, especially in the bottom 4 category of income. So for us, that's what we are really gearing towards, and we want to build out all our knowledge outputs into an information platform that will be available for everybody. Currently, that sits within the CAF website. If you go to the CAF website, there'll be a list of reports and presentations that we make. But eventually, we want to build this out into an information portal that anybody, whether you're in the housing space, whether you are in housing related or housing adjacent industry, you can be able to access for just better understanding of the industry. So we are doing this really so that we can ensure that architects do their thing, contractors build, developers invest. So that we are all not competing in terms of how we understand this space, and we leave the understanding and the sharing to organizations such as CAF, and then we leave the rest of the implementations to the other players within the industry. Yeah. Sorry, you're on mute, Nasra.
Thank you so much for your questions, everyone, and thanks, Alan, for that. I really appreciate all your comments and questions. I think also I wanted to add, Alan, is in terms of KGBS and working with CAF, one of the things we're working on through our ongoing discussions is to bring the open access initiatives to KGBS members so that we can then, give built environment professionals an opportunity to showcase or highlight where they are, because it's only when we understand where we are as a market can we then look at 2 aspects which are critical for us as KGBS. The sustainability component is one of them, and a key one for us, because it then determines, is sustainability gaining the momentum that we think it's gaining? If yes, great. Why is it gaining it? If not, why is it not? And data just helps us position a lot more things that will, impact not just our strategy as a council, but also to understand where the market is and where it needs to go if it's not going there fast enough or in the manner that it should. Because ultimately, we hear a lot around, there's a lot of financing around sustainability. So how can we, as KGBS, then assist our members build capacity, unlock bankability in order to realize these opportunities? So thank you so much, Alan, once again. I think if there's one more question, I can take one more question before we close the session. And if there's no question, then I'll give the opportunity for Alan to give his closing remarks. So I will invite one of you to make, or rather ask, a very quick question before I hand over to Alan for us to conclude the session. Is there anyone who has a question? This is your chance to ask any of your pressing questions. If not, we'll definitely make sure that we can keep these conversations going on. And once again, thank you for your time. So I'm not seeing any questions here. So Alan, is there any concluding remark you'd like to make to us before I release the attendees today?
Yeah, mine is to basically thank you, Nasra, for the invite and for organizing this, and by extension, the KGBS team. and all the KGBS members who are present. The only closing remark that I want to make is feel free to visit the CAF website. We have listed all the links as well in the presentation that I made that will be circulated shortly for us to engage. We are really calling for engagement. I think we are probably the only market participant who is open to criticism, that is going to improve the level of outputs that we build. And so much so even pushing the boundaries of sharing, because we are really crazy about reducing information asymmetry and sharing data. So if you're able to engage with the outputs, if you're able to give comments on the NMA dashboard, on the legal review, on the concession cost benchmark, like we're really looking forward to that, because that is only what is going to make us sort of improve in our trade. So yeah, thank you very much, Nasran.
Thank you as well. So thank you everyone for your time, and have a lovely afternoon. We will be sharing the presentation slides at the earliest, but thank you so much for your time, and we're looking forward to seeing you more in our webinars, and of course excited to see us conclude our MOU with CAF so that we can actually ensure that data is part of informed decision making for KGBS and for yourselves and the market at large. Thank you so much. Have a lovely afternoon. Thank you so much, and bye.